Tonight. In the meantime, we can talk to Professor Robert Patman from the Otago University now. He's in Dunedin for us. Professor, it seems certainly in Bamyan that there's been something of a spike in the level of instability there. What do you think is triggering that?
Well, several factors. Good morning, Rachel. I think several factors. Firstly, I think the Taliban have been active in a neighbouring province, Baghlan, for some time, and that's where the Hungarians have responsibility for they're the provincial reconstruction team there. Unfortunately, the Taliban have become more active there, and they're probably no doubt emboldened by the prospect of the international presence going in 2014. They also want to test the capabilities of the Afghan security forces on the ground. And what that has meant is they've stepped up their activity in the province next to Bamyan, and they have actually infiltrated across the border and you know, carried out these incidents, which unfortunately have killed 5 New Zealanders now in the last 2.5, 3 weeks.
How will America and the International Security Assistance Force be viewing this, do you think, as just another day in Afghanistan, or do you think they'll be noticing that, you know, this province was once peaceful, now it's becoming increasingly volatile?
Well, I'm sure they'll be looking to extend their patrols. Interestingly, a little while ago, the key government passed through Cabinet a measure to extend the patrols of the New Zealand force in Bamyan into the province of Baghlan. So that measure's in place, but obviously it was the Taliban, in fact, got their retaliation first, so to speak, because there is a concern, I think, in the New Zealand Defence Force that you need active patrolling to deter the sort of activities the insurgents are engaging in, and they feel this is not happening in the province next to Bamyan.
And the insurgency in Afghanistan has taken on sort of many faces these days, hasn't it, Professor? It's not just the Taliban. Tell us about some of the other factions that are operating there.
Well, I think that, you know, Al-Qaeda, of course, was the original rationale for going into Afghanistan. And I think Al-Qaeda has largely been marginalised, Rachel. They lost about 1/3 of their leadership through drone attacks in the last 18 months. I think there are some other factions competing with the Taliban, but from the NATO's point of view, Taliban remains the major worry and the major threat to the government in Kabul, and so I think they would see that as the major problem.
In light of what we've seen occurring in Afghanistan, particularly in the last 3 weeks in the Bamyan province, what are the options open now to our government, do you think, and the level of political pressure that's going on it now?
Well, I suppose there is one option, which is to, you know, not to extend the rotation, where there's a new contingent of troops due to rotate into Bamyan in a month's time. I don't think the key government will accept that option. It looks like cutting and running, and that could actually be seen as an unsettling force within the whole international coalition effort. A second factor, which I think the New Zealand Defence Forces in the process of doing, is extending active patrolling into the more unstable Baghlan province. That, of course, has implications, which is we may need more troops to do that, and we may need more equipment, more labs. And that, of course, may, you know, many New Zealanders may get very concerned that, you know, we're having to beef up our presence in New Zealand in order to protect the forces we have there. We are due to leave in 2013.
Another option, of course, would be to bolster it with potentially special forces. Our SAS is pretty well equipped and knows the Taliban and has secured Kabul for some time, until recently, before it handed over to the Norwegians. I guess that's also an option, in the same way that sometimes you see the Americans and the Brits do a so-called local surge when they bolster one area that's been problematic, like this border region, with special forces. Is that an option, do you think, that's open to our government as well?
I understand that an SAS logistics officer has been dispatched to Afghanistan, Bamyan. But that may be just to look at the situation. You know, the SAS will not announce in advance whether if they do decide to put some personnel on the ground. I think that will be seen as it'd be operationally sound to keep that quiet. But I don't think it can be ruled out. There's a concern to protect our people on the ground now in the period to 2013.
Is there a chance that, you know, we leave with a pretty sour taste in our mouth, that all the good work that certainly we've done in Bamyan could be, you know, overthrown, if you like, in the last year or so of our time there?
I mean, there is that possibility, but I don't think we necessarily should draw that conclusion yet. After all, Bamyan was the first province transferred over to Afghan control, you know, it would be a shame if a lot of the work that has been done there, fine work by the New Zealanders, was undone. I don't think we necessarily have to reach that conclusion. I do think there may have to be steps, however, to try to cut off, if possible, the flow of insurgents crossing the border of Bamyan and penetrating the area. And clearly, the Cabinet decision of a week or so ago to extend the area of patrolling may well be designed to do that.
Indeed. Professor Robert Patman from Otago University, thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.
You're back watching a special 3 News programme. We've just been to the Beehive, where we've had confirmation, a live press conference from the Prime Minister and the head of the Defence Force, confirming the deaths of 3 soldiers. They have been named as Corporal Luke Tamatea, who was 31, also Lance Corporal Jacinda Baker, 26, she was a medic, and also Private Richard Harris, who was just 21. We can talk again now to Professor Robert Patman from the University of Otago. Robert, that was an interesting press conference that was just given.
Yep.
One thing that stood out to me was that they said they were travelling in Humvees, which don't really offer an enormous amount of protection to anyone, because they can't travel in the LAVs, the light armoured vehicles, because of the terrain. This is an interesting scenario, isn't it?
It is. Also, there was an acknowledgement this morning by the Prime Minister before the press conference, even had they been in the LAVs, that wouldn't have offered much more protection than available through the lightly armoured Humvees. And I was also interested in the press conference. The Chief of the Defence Force, General Rhys-Jones, made a reference to mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, which are quite effective against roadside bombs. The Americans deployed these in 2007 in both Iraq and Afghanistan. They've been used to good effect to deter these roadside bombings. I'm wondering if we would be tempted to put in a request to bring in some into Bamyan. But of course, so far Bamyan's been relatively stable and hasn't justified that sort of deployment. But one issue is, you know, clearly there may be the perceived need now for more effective heavy armoured vehicles.
We're also hearing, of course, about this term they use, mission creep, which is where New Zealand troops may have to go across the border into Baglan. In fact, I think Cabinet's approved that that's okay for them to do so, because the Hungarians and their mandate in Baglan won't allow them to get across to the border and back by nightfall, and they can't be out beyond the dark, if you like. What chance do you think, if at all, that ISAF or America, if prompted by the New Zealand government, could put some pressure on the Hungarians potentially to get across to that border, which would mean reworking their mandate?
I'm not sure they will put pressure on the Hungarians. They may worry that if they put pressure on the Hungarians and the Hungarians publicly object, the Hungarians may leave a little bit earlier than they're pledged to. What may happen is that New Zealand, if, as it has approved in principle, to expand its area of patrolling, that the New Zealand government could request from the British and the Americans additional support, you know, the sort of the hard military muscle to be brought into Baglan to support, not directly but certainly indirectly, any New Zealand patrols that occur there, so that New Zealand efforts are less vulnerable.
Indeed. Professor Robert Patman from Otago University, thank you for your time and your analysis this morning.
Thank you.